But my first real workshop was to go to Cambodia, and I basically just packed up what I needed, a little bit like Hiroki's talk today. You know, I had my box of goodies, and just went out there to a school and taught a group of 20 teenage boys. And we were in conditions pretty much like Hawaii. You know, it was humid, it was hot, we were outside in a courtyard. But they absolutely loved it, and it was completely non-toxic, of course. It was all very safe, and it was a fantastic experience. So I think for me that's what started the ball rolling. By the time I got to Australia, and I was initially working with a master printer there, he suggested, why don't we go out to an Aboriginal community and do a workshop there. And again, it was the same situation. We were outside in very rough conditions. But I think there were probably three things that really appealed to the artists. One was that it was non-toxic. Two, that it was a very direct process compared to etching, which was sometimes difficult for them to see the concepts of going from a plate to a print. Whereas with the woodblock, they could cut the blocks and we could do proofing on site, so they got immediate results from that, which they loved. And the third one was that we could use their local ochres for printing, which they thought was absolutely fabulous. So I think that's probably where I'm coming from, as much as the non-toxic thing that we're beginning to talk about today.
Jump over to this.
Okay, I was just thinking that I compare the situation 30 years ago when I started my university. There was 200 liters container in the corner of the printmaking studio because all these screens were washed with heavy stuff. So big change really has happened during decades. And more, also safety regulations are tightened, and also recycling things and so on. And also students are very aware about environment issues. Environment issues, it's more and more present. And of course, very important role is also these different printmaking conferences, because there you can get ideas when you visit the printmaking studios and so on. I have been teaching this Japanese moku-hanga now, started in the 80s. I made a separate course. Earlier it was part of the demonstration. And now the situation is that we have more and more students in the line. Next week I will start my last course in my university, Japanese moku-hanga. There's 37 in line, and emails is all the time coming there in space. Unfortunately, I don't have to take 12 or 14 students. So I have been running 2 courses per year, and Western only one course. So it's totally different, and students really love this Japanese moku-hanga. Because it's environmental friendly also. We have also a lot of education students who go to schools and so on, and it will be also very easy to them to transfer that to the school circumstances. So, but also this is very important to show students how you keep clean your surrounding, how you clean. They don't know how to clean. They don't know how to wipe their. They can, you don't tell how to cut. Don't keep hand in front of your cutting. Everything has to, tell them. Just, step by step. And then you have to follow, because more and more we have exchange students abroad. And once I had 8 exchange students and 4 my own. 5 from Japan, coming to study Japanese moku-hanga. Everyone speaking in different way English, and they always say, yes, I understand, but you have to follow several times that they really understand. This goes so that you have to be careful.
So, you know, the ukiyo-e is water-based. At that time, no choice to make with oil-based, with press. There's no iron. So Japanese people only can use wood and also water-based inks and paper. So that's why there's no like etchings or like screen lithography at the time. Then now, in the universities, still like imported techniques is much important than the local Japanese art. I mean, etchings and lithography is much higher position than the moku-hanga. So only a few art universities has a moku-hanga professors. In my art university, Musashi Art University, never had moku-hanga professor. They only have etchings and lithography professors. Never happened in moku-hanga. So, this also happened in Kyoto. Mr. Kurosaki Akira, the famous moku-hanga artist, he also described me about similar situation in Kyoto. There's no moku-hanga courses at all at that time. So he talked about professor of Kyoto City University. If you buy such a big barrel, you are welcome to have a like moku-hanga course in the printmaking department. This means if you have a making like course in the department, you need to buy some like equipment, like big press or big like making a workshop. If the people doing moku-hanga, you can do like at home or anywhere, so you don't need to make the course for the moku-hanga in the art college. So that's why, not only this reason, but always the moku-hanga is very lower place. It's like bottom of the printmaking, and also printmaking is always very down. So moku-hanga is like totally bottom in Japan. So, and also really recently I'm very surprised. Many people really focused on non-toxic and already really focused on moku-hanga because of the environment and the non-toxic techniques. But in Japan, there's no argument about this topic. No one cares about it.
My experience too.
It's very big gap to discussing about the moku-hanga in Japan and also outside Japan. So it would be good to talk about more about it later.
Okay, Katie.
Yes.
Talk and then.
Well, I was working as an arts technician at the Evergreen State College in the late 90s, and that was when the school was really interested in converting the print shop over to non-toxic processes. So I was just sort of pulled into that as the technician to help with research and make decisions about how to change that space and change the materials and train the faculty and things like that. It had nothing to do with moku-hanga. There was none of that, but that was sort of made an impression, I guess, on me, just in terms of what I knew. I hadn't really studied printmaking before, actually. I was working as a sculptor. But that was sort of my foundation. And then as I continued on into book arts and printmaking as a graduate student, things were pretty toxic. After graduating, I went to MILAB, to Nagasawa, really interested in the portability aspect of moku-hanga, and then of course the non-toxic aspect of it in my own work. Since that time, I've taught a lot of different schools. I'm currently at the University of Alabama, where I teach everything from screen printing to lithography. I actually don't teach moku-hanga at University of Alabama, but I teach a lot of workshops. And I guess the thing that I would sort of add on is that I found a lot of interest in the book arts community about learning moku-hanga in a workshop setting because it's non-toxic, because it's a way of making images. There's a real attraction to the papers and materials and tools. And so I've had a lot of opportunity, mostly because I do a lot of letterpress, to teach workshops that are at Wells College and PBI, some of these more book arts related communities. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to elaborate on my experience when I had a Monbushu scholarship and went to Japan in '96 to Tama Art University. So first 6 months intense learning Japanese every day with a lot of homework, finally achieving a level that was acceptable because all the classes would be in Japanese. Then we get to the studio, brand new building, absolutely fantastic. Then the shop was, I would say, 70–80% of the students used oil, color, rollers, a press, German papers. There's no moku-hanga going on. There was one girl in the corner of the studio that nobody took any notice of, doing very traditional moku-hanga. And I just, the truth was that the people that were most interested in the moku-hanga were the foreign students. Ralph was in the same class as me. Some of the Koreans, there was a Danish girl, Suki-san, Indian guy. So I was really surprised. And then I kind of realized that there was a reverse thing going on, that it was exotic in a kind of a way to use what they use in Europe, to use German papers, to be using the presses, to be using oil colors. My teacher used oil colors for me. I can't remember his name. Ralph, can you? Fukita Fumiaki.
Yeah, he used oil.
Lovely guy, an interesting teacher, but oil printing. And then there were other small things. So although here I am in Japan, there was no attempt at any non-toxic, and at least in my experience in Scotland, that it started to move towards that. So I suggested, why do all the students have to use so much turps to clean up? Why can't we use some vegetable oil? And this was like, well, so go through and watch this demonstration of how to clean up with vegetable oil.
In that case.
And we're using vegetable oil, and then finishing, yes, with a little bit of turps. And also, there was many interesting. I liked the fact that the emphasis was on it's woodblock printing. It might be moku-hanga, but it was also the emphasis was on finding a contemporary or a different way of using it. So one of the things was using varnish as a resist on the wood. And in that room, the toxicity within weeks was just astonishing. Oil-based varnish all over the place, all over the floor, all everywhere. Xylene cleaners with the brushes, people washing their hands. And I'm just like, wow, this is so toxic, it's incredible. I basically went to one of the stores and I got an acrylic-based varnish. And I said, why don't people use this? you don't need any xylene cleaners. You clean your brush in water and soap. You know, and it's just a mindset. You know, what we use, not actually thinking what we could use. And also, then they imported another teacher to teach some suicide moku-hanga because the desire was there. And what I also watched, and Ralph could back me up on this, was that in actual fact more of the Japanese students started to then use suicide moku-hanga. So there was a kind of weird thing with that. They'd be going over to see what Ralph was doing. How do you do that? So there was a shift. There was a moment in time when, in actual fact, the Japanese students were starting to use washi again and doing more suicide moku-hanga in a space of 2 or 3 years while I was studying there. And becoming more aware of less toxic materials.
Can I elaborate on that? Because I was a Mombusho student myself in 1985, and I quickly assessed that the Japanese government Mombusho system was a very, very clever way to bring into the academic world in Japan all this knowledge of the West. The exchange was extraordinary. Things that I practiced from my studies in the Slade from Australia, and I just automatically did it. The next thing, I see drafting films out. We don't have to use so much washi paper to transfer. And it's a very, very clever program of the Japanese too. It's almost like buying in international information. And I was the only person practicing moku-hanga at the Tokyo Gaidai at the time. And so I had fantastic one-on-one demonstrations from National Living Treasures. I was indulged in information and learned so much. Slowly, the Japanese students came on board. And when they knew that I was traveling to Kochi to learn paper making, can we drive you? Can we take you down to Kochi? You know, we want to come too. They hadn't seen paper making themselves.
Can I just jump in and then back to you? Your talk this morning about all the mum and pop places to learn moku-hanga. Yeah, that's what I ended up doing. I went to those classes because I wanted to learn moku-hanga and I couldn't get it where I was in famous Tamabi University. I would corner famous Japanese printmakers in the bar after an exhibition and say, I want to come back to your studio and learn some stuff. And they would. They'd take me back and show me stuff. I guess in a kind of contemporary way, then what you really had was a situation where you have the space and the encouragement to develop. Sorry for jumping in.
And I just want to say, when I did return to Australia, it was my invitation from Jürgen Schmeiser. Now, he was an amazing printmaker and artist who was married to a beautiful Japanese lady and had Kurosaki as he had been a Mombusho student himself, and he had very, very close Japanese connections and friends. So Jürg had this vision to bring Japanese culture into the Australian Capital Territory, the Australian University in Canberra. So when he saw me at the Gaidai, he said, "You're coming back to Canberra." I married and left and moved back to Sydney, and the moku-hanga studio closed with me. And unfortunately, in Australia, we do not have moku-hanga water-based pigment Japanese method taught in any university. I had a desperate call from the head of printmaking from a university in Perth. He'd actually written it into the prospectus and said, "Can I come and study with you for a week? I've written it into the prospectus, but I don't know what to do." So he flew over for a week, and I said, "A week's better than nothing, you know." And we had the most amazing, intense week, and then he realized what he'd actually taken on. And yet he didn't invite me there because he was still wanting to control the situation. And I found it's extremely difficult in Australia Australia, as Jackie would know, and Susan's with me, we are on a little crusade, a half a dozen of us in Australia, to try and teach this medium and have it acknowledged. If we were to write moku-hanga on our prints in a major exhibition, no one would have a clue what it is. Agree? We actually have to, in brackets, either put traditional-based Japanese woodblock printing and moku-hanga, or we just say multi-block woodblock printing and say 15 blocks. Or it is still there's such a long way to go in Australia to have it in the education system. And I compete against a lot of senior male staff who are etchers, and you know, they've got their hierarchical ground, and to try and get there. But what I try and teach is that moku-hanga can have any other technique basically laid over it. So it's a fantastic way to incorporate it and utilize it. So slowly we're making inroads, and then people see our prints and go, oh, that's really interesting, how did you do it? But yet to try and get it into the system is really, really difficult.
So what I gather, I'm just kind of wondering what, based on what Katsu was saying about the universities, art schools in Japan. I mean, it appears that there are more students doing moku-hanga now compared to what it sounds like then. A few more, but it's
not so many.
okay. So it's
Still better than before, I
Yeah.
think.
So I guess
What about you?
I mean,
But not so.
But if, I mean, I guess if that's not the case, then my question would really make sense. But I'm wondering if that is happening. That is it more about kind of reclaiming the culture, or is there a thought about non-toxic nature, water-based? Because obviously, a lot of schools, I don't even know in the U.S. any schools that do oil-based screen printing anymore. So that has been almost completely transitioned to water-based, for example. So with the oil-based woodcut versus now there's the water-based woodcut that you can also use, regardless of the cultural aspect of it or anything. Is there any kind of discussions or thought or anything along that line?
Yeah, when I went to junior high school teachers meetings in this summer, they are really focused on non-toxic, of course, and also water-based things, and also really care about also the knives, I mean, safety. But now it's getting, even in art universities or art colleges, just recently they just started about caring the environment and the toxic things. My time, 15 years ago, they don't much care about it. Now they had a new building in the National University. They had a really good system of evaluation. So it's getting better, but still, when I went to the college in Kansas City or Melbourne or London, they are much more care about toxic than Japan.
So one other thing that I thought was interesting was I think you mentioned it, the toxicity of sounds. And so that in relation to that, I also thought it was interesting that the portable nature of moku-hanga allowed you to move yourself away from that toxic environment. I think that's another thing in some ways we can relate the portability to the non-toxic nature of moku-hanga as well. But one of the things that I thought is interesting for my students, my point of view, just teaching students, is that, and maybe it's because I don't have an in-depth knowledge of different chemicals and machines, but moku-hanga seems very direct. You know where things come from, what the material is. Dosa is gelatin and elm, so it has this kind of simplicity as opposed to Western technique where you have to have this big machine and you have to have this chemical that you have to purchase from a special suppliers. And a lot of students nowadays, I think, are more and more aware of where things are coming from. And some of them have certain philosophy. For example, I have a student that was vegan, so he was trying to find alternative things such as, I don't think we were that successful, but instead of using gelatin for dosa, we were trying to use gonyaku, for example, so as to not use any animal product. So that's another thing that I think allows a lot of students to kind of, there's a degree of intimacy and directness in terms of the materials that are used. It's wood, it's knife, it's paper, and the chemicals are not necessarily something you have to buy from, a supplier. You could maybe go to a grocery store and try to buy something. Any comments?
Comments about this vegetable oils? We are using vegetable oils to wash rollers and also using tables and so on. Years ago already, wherever possible, we are using vegetable oils. And we are using oil-based printer, but they can be inked also with packaging, so they doesn't consist in heavy metals anymore. Dry use. But this ink producers, they doesn't they does not list what they are using in the inks. I was mentioning that issue in our book, because some people might have allergies, some stuff, and they should be read or the can, ink can, that one doesn't consist really. And we have a law that these who import, companies who import these things should list it. But these producers that will keep this detailed information, they are saying that it's our secret recipes. So
there is a book called Artists Beware, and every process chemical has a list of what's. For example, on the bottle it says blanket wash. Sounds nice. Just wash. It's used for cleaning ink off or offset roller. I saw a lot of people, and then you look up blanket wash, highly toxic, make you sterile, and you see 15.
Is it a book, like an actual book, or internet book?
It's a book.
Okay, so it's not like an internet.
It's been around for 20 years,
Okay.
20,
And a book
30
called
years.
Artists Beware.
Artists beware.
That's what it
Yeah.
That's what I said. Artists beware.
That's
Okay.
the title of the book.
Different
Well,
accent.
you know,
It's a
and,
big thick paperback.
it lists everything, and it really opens your eyes.
Okay.
I mean, that's when people started going, oh, I'm going to wash my hands. Even, white spirit is very toxic. And when you read what it does to you. And then, in actual fact, the head of the print department, who sacked me, doing moku-hanga, he died of lung cancer, and he was a screen printer using oil-based things and cleaners. And then you find out a number of screen printers didn't have a long retirement.
Yeah, they reference to China, and I don't know if anybody else attended the Impact 9 conference in China. So I went with open eyes thinking this is going to be wonderful to see traditional printing and the water-based traditional printing. you actually as a student have to go through the entire printing department to earn the respect and the level as a postgraduate student to go into this very special department to learn traditional water-based printing. So it's an interesting, it's up there as a level, but you've got to pass through all the toxicity to get there. It's kind of a contradiction. And now China has, the Royal Academy in Hangzhou has built a museum to honor and respect the earliest movable type, which came down from Tibet. And when I was in Tibet back in they were destroying the monasteries and the movable type and the blocks. And now a museum has been built to actually, right next to the academy, with a gentleman who's demonstrating traditional Chinese printing all the time. So at least in China, the students are making these extraordinary woodcuts, whether they're laser cut or hand cut but I must admit, there seems to be a huge revival in woodcut in China. And if you look at the big international competitions, the Chinese woodcuts are very strong and winning major awards. So we can only hope that they see the light in their environment and move to less toxic practices. It was really interesting that to get there, you have to go through everything else. And it was a tiny environment with about 6 students only that were permitted and learned the carving skills and the printing techniques, and with the traditional Chinese baron. So yeah, it was just an interesting observation.
Is that more of a technical training, or they would, as a printer, or as an artist?
It was almost as close as becoming a supreme calligrapher, to learn the skill of printing and the respect, and to be able to work with a particular master. So it was a very, very sophisticated and respected department.
If anybody's what Roslyn has pointed out, you can look up in English Purple Bamboo Studio. That's the English translation.
That's the studio's name.
Pardon?
That's the studio's name.
That's the studio, but it's inside the university. And that's a very elite, research-oriented studio that attracts a very small number of students who go on not only to become trained as artists in the medium, but also they're creating a kind of history that has never been written. There is no history book on the techniques in China that exists. And so, and that particular China Academy for the Arts is the top keeper of those techniques. But there are 8 art academies, elite academies across the country that have significant water-based programs, and you don't have to go. That particular studio is unique, but there are beyond the 8 academies, a number of other universities that have Chinese-style moku-hanga that's widely represented, and it's amazing. And there is because you have the indigenous claim there. It's very much in the interest of the government, particularly now, to make sure that that's spotlighted.
It's taken a year, and we've finally made the exchange. But she said, this is the top secret of the country. Do not tell anybody. You have this.
Now we all know.
Now you all know. But this is this incredible respect for it as well. So it's kind of interesting what was open to us as Westerners being there, but what the students are actually. Anyway, I'm probably a little bit ignorant of the true story.
In China, is there an awareness of non-toxic water-based versus oil-based, or any kind of desire towards?
Not obvious, but I'm not speaking the language, and the Impact Conference, unfortunately, none of the Chinese presenters were translated to English for us, so we were 2 conferences happening almost into one. So it was very, very hard to sneak out of the radar and find out the information.
One comment about this inks I mentioned. Every chemical we are using in printmaking studio or any other studio in university, they have to be, every chemical has to list it and a file, so they can find
I think US equivalent is the MSDSG, where the information about all the chemicals and things that are used in the.
Also, our printmakers associations, for example, they have published this guide of safety environment and safety places to the artists. Sculptors also.
I'm just curious, I mean, we're kind of talking about moku-hanga specifically, but also printmaking in general. Is there any comments from the audience in terms of any studios, if you have experience kind of renovating the studios or making the studio facilities a little bit more non-toxic, changing supplies, and of course, the panelists as well, that anybody can share, yes?
Well, I was using Daniel Smith organization and I was developing a rash, and I talked to a homeopath doctor, and she said when you're washing, I was washing everything with my bare hands and thinking the water, the soap were keeping me safe, and she said that's actually the most dangerous time because the water opens your pores and then you're absorbing more.
So you're maybe using warm water?
Sure, a little, and just, everything was wet, you're scrubbing everything up, and she said, be sure you use rubber gloves when you're washing. That's the most important time to protect your hands.
I would like to say that Edinburgh College of Art asked me to come back and do my moku-hanga classes, which were very popular. And I had been using all my own tools, all my brushes, all my equipment. And I said, no thanks. I said, if students want to learn, they can come to me. And it's been happening. There have been students that get awards and prizes, and they come to my studio and learn with me, and that suits me much better. They lost a chance. When they come to learn with me, everything is there, and it's up to them if they want to take that further. Because there is an element of people tend to think it is quite easy, and it isn't. It's simple in its essence, but it takes time. But when you get, I miss that as well, the level of a good art student. I miss that inquisitive, keen people. So I would say that most of them then go on and invest in some good tools. The few that come, they love it.
I'm interested in that soap thing, so washing too much, so it's not about the toxicity, so I heard just vaguely, but washing too much, so makes your skin very delicate, and it is you're much more in danger to get all these allergies because you are washing too much. So water can be toxic in a way if you wash too much. So what about the soaps? So what kind of soap or washing agents you use when you wash your moku-hanga tools?
Allergy free.
You have got a sensitive baby.
We have these gloves.
Big gloves, yes. So gloves is advisable.
For oil-based, I think most, or at least a lot of the shops use gloves, wear gloves.
It's a good point because I always, when I'm teaching a class, I always say, remember it's not non-toxic, it's just less toxic. So if you're going to be eating your sandwich with those red colours, it's got cadmium in it. So make sure you wash your hands. And it's just less toxic.
And Catherine?
I agree, non-toxic doesn't really exist. But I'd also just like to mention the LD50. Is everybody aware of what that is? Lethal dose 50. They give 100 rats or mice a substance and only 49 die. We're allowed to call it non-toxic.
always the common sense would be, you don't put your hands in, your, whatever you use to wash your plates or whatnot. And then I was doing oil pastels as part of a project in school, and the teacher, I was smearing it with my finger because I wanted to smear the different colors, and so I had, blue stuff all over my hand. And he came over and he's like, well, what are you doing to protect your hands from that? And so he made a big speech on how the particles go through your skin and it's bad for you. And so ever since then, it doesn't matter what I do, I just don't get, I'm super clean in the studio, I wash with gloves, or I just don't get any.
It is true, those particles are always present in the.
And so just pull that off.
It's a toxic world.
Yeah.
I think we also sometimes forget that geographical location and climate affects a lot of these materials. A lot of printmaking originated in the colder climates of Europe or places. But in Australia, we have a huge issue with climate, heat, evaporation, the conditions. So we have a lot to combat. So we have sometimes the slightest toxicity, it's in the air so fast, and we're really aware of it. So we're incredibly concerned with ventilation and airflow, and not just what's on our skin, but the
Right,
shifting
and
of the
when
air.
we wash our hands, the whatever drains down the
So we can
drains,
be working in a 40 degrees centigrade day in summer. That's a summer's
That's
day.
moldy, so about mold. Mold is also kind of toxic. The way you get moldy and the smell.
Yeah, so if I'm printing, I automatically put some tea tree oil in the water. Tea tree oil.
Tea tree oil.
Tea tree oil is an Australian antiseptic, antibacterial product, and one little drop will suspend in water. So that slows down potential mold growing in your paper when it's damp.
It's a natural product.
When I was on
It's from the tea tree.
when I was at the Tokyo Theatre,
Not drinking tea.
when I was in Tokyo Theatre, we were taken up to conservation in the National Museum to understand paper moisture conservation. And they had a product called TBZ that was used in all the, made into a solution and put into all the water. So I checked this chemical out, and it's exactly the same chemical used in Australia for sheep dip. The sheep get bathed in to stop fungal growth in the wool.
It's dodgy stuff.
So it's a product that's such a diverse, antifungal, anti-mold. The easiest for us as printmakers is tea tree oil. And in Australia, you buy it at the airport, it's an export of, we can send it to you. It's amazing.
It has nothing to do with drinking tea. It's a
It's
plant,
essential
a
oil
particular tree.
in the buying.
If you get a mosquito bite, one drop fixes it.
I think there's a question or a comment over there. I think there are particulate grade filters that I think you have to use, not just a, mask.
No.
Yeah, it seals. Yes, yes. But I think often students, one should use that when we're doing litho, for example, when we're doing rosin and talc as well. But I think often, you just talc quickly so you don't put on that whole thing, which is probably not a good, not a good practice.
Just for the pigment.
If you are using these powder things, it's good to remember that part of this stretch of the air is unvisible. So it's really good to use masks.
And I was told by our environment and health and safety department in our not covered because those participants are just floating in the studio all the time. So if you just have a glass of water, you're just letting that go into your water and you're drinking that water. So yeah, but we have a question or comment over here as well.
I used to teach in this department, and I started off in fiber arts, and I went to printmaking. And when the professor before me retired, she used oil-based, and when I came in, I did water-based, because I came from a fiber background, because we use it in textiles. But I also changed the, we expose our screens with the sun.
Oh.
And then now when I do my linos, I use aqua inks. So I don't kind of say non-toxin, I sort of say low-tech, so that the students can go home and do whatever they learn on their, at home, because they're usually not coming in the studio time. So if they got to rush for the deadline, there's no excuse. But we're also looking at natural dyes, and so I've been using natural dyes in printmaking. You know,
so that's interesting, because one of my students used natural foraged dyes to make pigments.
Yeah.
And although I think it really, he wasn't that knowledgeable, so it wasn't as, the color wasn't as intense, but it was almost like dyeing fabric, obviously, yeah.
Yeah, I come from, well, I'm Hawaiian, so our tradition, our cultural tradition is bark cloth, and there's a whole thing about natural dyes and printing with, relief printing with those bamboo stamps, but the key to that is, because we have a whole dye experiment going on, is really the mordant.
Right.
That is not really the dye, so you can have many different mordants that comes out different colors. So it's, you know, it's a good assignment for a young grad student, you know, to do.
About these masks, don't use these normal surgery masks, but to apply these extra filter, yeah, it's much more safe.
And yeah, so those masks would often come with what it protects you from when you purchase. But there's a
the book referred to before, the arts we wear. They have a chart of what different masks do. Some look the same, but they are not, good enough for fine powders. And I have a fiber background as well. And I was always told that natural dyes are not toxic. And also that your cuticles are the biggest absorbing area of any of those solvents. So we did use barrier creams of different sorts. There are a couple around, but sometimes you only have the only other comment is as far as fungicide, if you Google, a lot of people put thymol into the water when they damp the paper to keep it from going bad instead of drying it up. And if you Google thymol, you find out that there's quite a controversy over a while, and it's decided that that's not a good idea.
Speaking of dampening paper, Katie, didn't you say somebody had used Dr. Bronner's peppermint soap and to keep it from
And also apple cellulose. Peppermint.
Can I just maybe come back to moku-hanga and say in Australia, it seems to have a huge appeal to more senior people who want to work in their own space, conscious of toxicity, and have the freedom to do what they want scale-wise. So when some of us teach workshops, we are usually doing it at private organizations and attracting a lot of people. People travel right across the country to do a moku-hanga workshop because they understand that they can work in a safe environment and take it home to work with. So it is a huge plus as a medium in Australia. It's just taking time to get that word out there and get, I think, earn the respect that the medium needs.
That area is not something I know a lot about. Two things I want to say. One, whether there is through websites things that have kind of surfaced. Just remember something Ralph said. To which extent all the things that have been said in terms of the portability, the pop-up nature, maybe some is very important, but just as a quick term, and the relative non-toxicity can be used as almost like, I'd like to use the word brand, but that we need to put that out much more, as Roslyn was saying, to advertise or promote the field.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, from my experience in US, I teach a lot of workshops, and I hear from a lot of people that's one of the main reasons that they're taking my moku-hanga workshop is that less toxic nature of moku-hanga, that it's water-based, it's something that they can actually do in their own space. And I notice it more and more. There's more. I sometimes joke to some of my friends that moku-hanga became a cash cow because I'm often asked to teach workshops because of that popularity in that aspect.
So that is already a familiar then, or do you use it in your own promotional material?
I mean, as an artist, I wouldn't necessarily promote my work as a process that is non-toxic or less toxic. And that's kind of interesting, kind of maybe relates to last night's roundtable in some ways, but it's the work or the image first. But as an educator, I think often that is something that I touch upon frequently and a lot. Not only just the non-toxic nature or less toxic nature of it, but it's approachable, I guess, for students. It's doable that without having access to a big print shops or equipment and all the supplies that, and of course there's a degree of what kind of work you can make doing moku-hanga. You can make really sophisticated, very well crafted work versus very, novice work, but it's still possible for a lot of the people that are starting to work in moku-hanga. So I do notice that, I think, more and more, because I've been teaching it since I did my Nagasawa workshop in 2004, and I think Katie and I do a lot of workshop teaching in US, and we are always asked to teach workshops every summer. They always fill. And I mean, the other element of it is, there's a lot of other things. I know a lot of the panelists and all of you also do a lot of very experimental things in addition to moku-hanga and related to moku-hanga. But another thing that I also started to teach is using laser cutter and combining that with moku-hanga, because one of the things that I've noticed is that there's a whole age range in the workshops and skill level, and with that technology added, it becomes a little bit easier for some people because the carving element should be a little bit difficult for some with certain physical difficulty or and so on. So I think that's another. Go ahead.
Yeah, like non-toxic or less toxic is basically related on the very low technology, like using natural materials, using by hand. But as you said, also use the ballet maker, Otosan makes ballet, still using the bamboo sheets. Maybe it can be used maybe different materials as well.
Yeah, and I think that's really, like when Katie was talking about when she first found out about moku-hanga, you borrowed a canvas?
Like canvas and cardboard and some cord that I got from the hardware store.
Actually, we follow like tradition of moku-hanga, sometimes too much. I do. I said, but I do use barrel and also the traditional knives, but also you can use the laser cut and also even a press we can, or maybe we can more like 3D printers, or maybe we can like connect with new technologies.
Which has accessibility to. Yeah.
Well, and I think I'm going to just mention, like, one of the challenges that I've personally found is that, well, in workshop teaching, there's a lot of enthusiasm, and people really take from that, like, intense one-week experience, they take away a lot that I think they can build on later. But when I've taught moku-hanga in an academic institution, and maybe some of those who do this have tips for me, over that longer period of time, working with generally a younger audience, they find it really laborious and tedious, and so I'm like trying to figure out how I want to bring it into the current curriculum in a way that feels successful. I think some of the stuff with laser cutting is part of it, mixing it with other techniques, you know, is also maybe part of it. But I have personally found that challenging with the college level student. They're kind of in the beginning, and then as they get deeper in, they're like, it's too hard, my hands. So anyways, I mentioned that as a challenge. Jacqueline?
Yeah, I think I've had a similar feeling working with indigenous artists, because we generally have a group of 8 or 10 artists, and you can see straight away some of them, they just love skill of the wood, and they could just sit there the whole day, and they do sit there the whole day, they won't even go away for lunch, and they just want to carve. And then there's others, they'll do it for about 5 minutes now, I'm gone, and that's it, you know, you won't see them for dust, so that's the end of it. But just also coming back to the point about adapting to the situation, I think, again, going back to the workshop in Cambodia, they were so enthusiastic, and, you know, I did leave them brushes and some paper and carving tools, but one of the things we did during that week was actually go to the local market and source any local papers, so we actually did some testing of the local papers while we were there. And the other thing they were asking about the barrel as well, if we use a covered barrel, we use, you know, banana leaf or something, and I said, look, I don't know, just try it. See what happens. So they were already thinking of that process after I leave. How can we, you know, make this sustainable? How can we carry it on?
That reminds me of the best example of adaptability. Following Japan, I went to Tibet to do research in the woodblock carving of monasteries. And I finally found the printers tucked away, discreetly printing. But the only material they had to print with was black shoe polish. So they were printing with shoe polish to print their prayers, their sutra prayers. It was working. They managed to get impressions. So it really brings you back to the heart of it. If you really want to do something, you'll find a way. But I don't think it was a non-toxic activity. It was just desperation to be able to print, because they couldn't buy the inks. It was taboo to be actually printing. So they had this little stack of shoe polish tucked away. It was wonderful.
I have visited during the years several universities with many studios, and kind of collecting what kind of advices or notions to the student to be aware. And Bristol, it was very nice when there was a silkscreen unit and there was a special unit, and this class famous. So please take your dial ring off before using this special unit. Diamond ring.
Like we all know.
But 2 years ago, when I finished one of my workshops, and we have an evaluation, and we start so that students tell that what is their subject, what they want to say, and so on, tell about the motive. So so serious that she has been in therapy for 2 years, and now she's closing, and now she's healed because she's part of this woodcut course, and she has been all the time doing things so great for us, and not concentrated at all, but this woodcut forced her to concentrate and to be silent after many days. That was good.
When I went to India for having the moku-hanga workshop last year, I was invited from art academies in Baldwin. There is a class for woodcut, but most of them used oil-based inks and also use MDF.
Yeah.
Not good. But there's many good woodcut artists and students. As you know, Indian population is such a big, so if they use like non-toxic material, it's such a big, huge impact for the environment.
India, China.
Well, it's the same in Thailand. The schools in the so-called woodcut classes the schools where I teach, they've just got MDF as well, and then back home you do some really nasty oil bases, and they're not. I think sometimes when we're talking about non-toxic materials, actually it's a privilege sometimes to use non-toxic materials. I think in a lot of schools around the world, they've only got access to really toxic, so-called toxic materials. So that's something I think that's something we should be aware of around this conference, that we are potentially to have access to things. And it's a shame because I think in Thailand, people are interested in water-based moku-hanga, but they have to no way they have the resources to buy materials for that. So that's not going to happen.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, actually you could use quite cheap Chinese inks. You could do simple black and white. But I think going the whole to the moku-hanga whole is
I think, also one of the lovely, simple things is that some people just need to be creative. Even if the result's not even that fantastic, with a very simple set of tools, a very simple burn, some quite inexpensive paper, and one black colour, they can do very exciting things. It's good. I'll get a pencil.
Just one question about time today. That was my theme today. So, because the dining area is very far away and there's another panel starting from 7, so we should kind of get to the other panel.
Oh, that's right.
So it's, if this is going to be up to 6 o'clock, so there will be a problem people coming back. So, because there's no food around.
Okay, so is there any comments or questions that you must ask or say before we end this early so we can all go eat?
There is food at the University of Hawaii dormitories. Go down Dole Street, the round cylinder towers, there are 4 of them. In the base of one of theirs is a cafeteria where you can get dinner.
Yes, that we heard about that for most of us, so we are heading there.
Good.
How many people can you accommodate?
It's not in the room upstairs.